So this afternoon we've got two great speakers. This time we're talking about personally owned vehicles, and we've got two of the leading companies that are looking to build technology platforms that they can license to other companies, including OEMs, for level 2 ADAS kind of systems, and eventually, hopefully, level 4 systems. And so I want to go kind of deep. We only have two speakers, so hopefully we can go into a little more detail about their business models, their technology, and where they see the future going. So let's start with Andrew, who's at Nuro. I've been covering Nuro for a long time. I think I interviewed one of your founders back in probably 2018, like before the robots had launched. There was this big ambitious vision. We're going to have these robots that do Domino's pizza and groceries and stuff. And now you have a very different business model. Talk me through kind of how that pivot went and like what the new like vision for how Nuro works is like.
It's been an interesting evolution. And for those of you who don't know, Nuro was started back in 2016. And the first 8 years of the company, we were very focused on goods delivery. So last mile autonomous goods delivery. And the model at the time for those first 8 years was to effectively own the whole value chain, meaning we designed this custom delivery vehicle. We were going to work with BYD to produce it. We were going to own and operate those assets, and then obviously build autonomy to power the whole thing. And over the last couple of years, we went through a pretty significant shift. And basically what we decided was to focus on our core competency of building autonomy and try to work with partners to build out an ecosystem around that, as opposed to doing so many of those things ourselves. And it was not an easy shift. I'll be quite honest. I think it really required us to re-examine our identity as a company. Everyone kind of knew us as the delivery bot company. And so to abandon that and to look at a different model was hard, but ultimately it was the right thing to do, both because of how it has set us up to participate in the ecosystem that is evolving, but I think also in terms of what it has allowed us to do internally and the muscles that we've built around validation, around vehicle programs, so on, have really set us up well as we get into this Nuro 2.0 phase of the next phase of the company, where again, we're just licensing the AV stack, so both hardware and software. And we'll have some more news to share in the coming months on what concretely those commercial partnerships look like. But I think for the most part, we feel really good about where we're coming out and how that investment and how that shift is going to set us up for the future.
And what is the status of those robots? Are they going like completely, or are you spinning them off to somebody else? Are you still like running on a smaller scale? What should we expect there?
It's still a really important R&D platform for us. So we announced in the fall a fully driver out deployment with the R3 custom delivery bot at a city scale. So we basically did a full driverless deployment, went through a full validation process, put together a full safety case for, again, a full L4 driver out deployment at city scale in the Bay Area. And it's with those vehicles. And because they are occupantless, it means that from day one, we don't have the luxury of having a safety driver in the loop. And so again, going back to my comment about the muscles that we built in those first 8 years, the ability to do full driverless deployments is a big one. And validation specifically is a really, really hard thing to do. I think when you look at autonomy development, just broadly, getting to an acceptable level of functionality and behavior is probably 25% of the challenge. Validating the system can perform safely at scale and doing the testing with a level of rigor that is required to put your name on a scaled driverless deployment really is remaining 75% and very hard. And so we think of R3 as, again, the first 8 years of our company, but it set us up to do these things really well and put us on this accelerated path to full L4 driver out deployment.
So Nuro started out with a kind of full stack hardware focus approach. In some ways, Wayve has kind of had the opposite approach, where from the beginning, I think you guys are really focused on the software layer, and always intended to do kind of a partnership kind of licensing approach. Talk me through how Wayve approaches this market and where you are in that journey.
Absolutely. So Wayve was founded in 2017. From the beginning, we've been taking a technological approach using end-to-end AI, which I think is now pretty widely known as AV 2.0. So this is different from the traditional approach to autonomous vehicles, what we refer to as AV 1.0, which was more hand-coded and robotics-based. So we use fully end-to-end AV, and our business model is to license our technology directly with OEMs. And so our technology, the first product that we'll be deploying is an L2 plus L3 capable solution that integrates with consumer vehicles, and that can over-the-air upgrade all the way through L4, of course, dependent on the base vehicle hardware capability.
So talk to me more about the kind of development and testing. I know you have some test vehicles in various cities. What does that look like, and kind of how far along are you, and what's the roadmap look like there?
Yeah, absolutely. So Wayve is headquartered out of London, which makes us a bit of an outlier compared to many of the folks in the Bay Area. But we have fleets now in London, in San Francisco, and as well as Germany. Watch this space for the next markets that we'll announce with our in-house fleets. One of the unique things about Wayve, though, is that because we take this partner-first approach, we're laser-focused on the vehicle intelligence. We're able to keep quite a petite internal R&D fleet, and instead we're able to leverage data from not only our in-house fleet, but also from the fleets of our OEM partners, as well as third-party data providers. So everything from on-road single cams to robotic picking arm data to ingesting the rules of the road and code of conduct for UK driving, what's released by the UK government. Our foundation model is able to learn from a really diverse set of data in addition to our in-house fleet and accelerate our performance improvement.
Cool. So I'd like to ask you both, I guess starting with Andrew. You guys are both have a kind of partnership model where you're going to OEMs and you're providing some technology, and they're obviously building the car. Talk to me in a little more detail about what'll that look like? What do you bring to the table? What do the OEM need to build to the table? And what's the kind of nature of the collaboration that you'll need to have those pieces work together?
Sure. So I'd like to divide that across the two verticals that we are pursuing. So we have level 4 full autonomous mobility and delivery, so both for people and goods. And then we are also starting to enter into the L2 plus L3 space. On the L4 side, I think it's a bit clearer cut. Our product is the Nuro driver. So it is the software plus the AV hardware that ultimately powers a full level 4 autonomous vehicle. And so the integration process starts with a base vehicle platform that has the necessary hardware redundancies to be fully L4 capable. There are not many of those vehicles that exist today. If you were to do a full landscape analysis of all the vehicles out there that actually could get to level 4, it's a very small number. And so it starts with that piece. And then the subsequent integration, I think without getting into too much detail, ultimately is about trying to get our system integrated at the production line such that it can be produced at scale. I think you've seen other L4 deployments from various AV companies. No one has really gotten to that point yet. Most of those programs have been retrofit programs where after the vehicle comes off the line, you have to do the integration. That adds a lot of cost, it adds time, it adds friction, so on. And so one of the big things that will characterize the L4 partnerships that you'll see Nuro announce in the future will be that foundational hardware redundancy. Now, on the L2 plus L3 side, it's a little bit more nebulous in terms of what form it takes. It could be a skinnier version of the Nuro driver, basically a downscaled version of our current sense and compute, optimized from a cost standpoint to be compelling to an end consumer. We also have what we call the Nuro AI platform, which is effectively a productized version of all the tools and infrastructure that we have built to develop L4 autonomy. So there are a number of OEMs out there that want to continue doing this in-house, and they are looking for ways to augment that effort. And so showing up to them, as I'm sure Kaity knows, with kind of a black box solution, saying, hey, here's our driver, just throw it on there, is not going to be attractive to a lot of folks. And so trying to meet them where they are and say, okay, how can we take more of what we call a white box approach to effectively take a lot of the tooling, again, and infrastructure that we've already built and help them accelerate their own in-house efforts is another form that it could take for us on the L2 plus L3 side.
Mm. So Kaity, when you're doing the testing in London and other cities, you're sort of testing a level 4 system, right? A system that kind of does the whole driving task.
Actually, our current technology is classified as SAE level 2. And so you can think of it as SAE level 2, that means a lot of things depending on who you're talking to, right? Okay. So think of the technology as akin to what you'd think of with Tesla FSD 13. You could leave your house, drive an hour, multiple hours without ever needing to intervene and arrive at work, and the vehicle intelligence would be safely monitoring and driving the system the entire way.
Okay. And the difference there, I mean, I guess like I don't love the SA levels, but like I mean, I guess the classic level 2 was just kind of lane keeping and driver assist, and it's kind of like I think it's a little unclear like what qualifies something as level 3, but I see what you mean.
Just to clarify on that one, totally agree. L2 can feel quite nebulous. And so there are some of what we think of as building blocks of ADAS or level 2, like lane keep assist or automatic emergency braking. We view these things as really table stakes. Now, you have to do those things, but the entire dynamic driving task, so again, completely from point A to point B, navigating, negotiating complex intersections. Our office in King's Cross, or our office in London is in King's Cross. So every day we're operating in the most complex, dense roads imaginable out there globally.
Because I think it's interesting, like the classic OEM business model you see with something like Tesla is it started with a very basic product that they shipped, and then they like up-leveled it. And in some ways, both of your companies are kind of do the opposite, where you're like building something that's like, it's not a level 4 in the fact there's no driver, but you're like doing the entire driving task. And then, I mean, especially Nuro, you initially tried to build something that's, it doesn't need a driver at all, and then shipping it as a consumer product second. Is there so how do you think about the relationship between those? I mean, is that in fact a different technology solution, or do you think of it as like one product they're going to ship both for, OEM, customer-owned cars and also for delivery and robotaxi and stuff in the future?
Great question. So because Wayve uses end-to-end AI, it's one vehicle intelligence that can power multiple vehicle platforms in any geography from L2 through L4. So the same vehicle intelligence that powers our R&D fleet in London is the same vehicle intelligence that powers our fleet in Germany, that powers our fleet in the United States. And it also is the same vehicle intelligence that can operate everything from a passenger vehicle to, we've put the vehicle intelligence on a 3.5-ton electric van for deliveries. We're about 7 platforms deep using this same technology. And it's one of the key differentiators is that generalization. So when we think about that same technology being able to operate multiple vehicle platforms with multiple sensor modalities in multiple geographies, it's a real game changer for OEMs, because what it allows them to do as well is to deploy this technology across their entire fleet and across multiple geographies, as opposed to having to reinvest for each new platform that they'd like to deploy it on. Another important thing here is because we are focused just on the vehicle intelligence, we're hardware agnostic. We can integrate with different SoCs, with different sensor modalities and layouts, whether that be vision only, vision radar, LiDAR, which is also a huge benefit for OEMs who are looking to rapidly integrate advanced autonomy solutions with the existing hardware platforms that they have today. We don't require them to actually change their hardware deployments, which means that we have an accelerated path to market with things that are coming off the assembly line and being put into consumer hands as late as end of 2025 and 2026.
So talk to me a little bit more about that process. I assume there's some kind of minimum hardware requirement. What do the OEMs need to do to kind of be ready to ship with a Wayve solution?
Yeah, one of the beauties of our approach is that we can work alongside the let's call it the base vehicle hardware, both SoC and sensor layouts that are coming off of assembly lines today. Most vehicle platforms are coming equipped with, let's call it minimum levels of both Qualcomm, NVIDIA, or Renesas SoC that's capable of delivering L2 plus L3 technology. And what Wayve is able to do is to work with OEMs to say, what sensors do you have existing on your hardware platforms? And here's the level of autonomy that we can deliver as a result, as opposed to requiring a 4 to 6 year lead time where they change their hardware platform. It's tightly coupled with the software. Essentially, what we're allowing them to do is to decouple the hardware and software and allow more rapid and more flexible deployment of autonomous solutions.
Andrew, what about you? Are there kind of minimum hardware requirements? And if you had an OEM partner, are you like recommending? I mean, I think you're not necessarily supplying the hardware, but are you recommending like this is the hardware you need, or is that kind of worked up on a kind of per customer basis? How does that work?
The answer definitely differs depending on whether you're talking about an L4 deployment versus an L2 plus L3.
Let's talk about L2 for here.
I think our system is similarly flexible.
Okay. All right. Starting with Andrew, I'd love to hear your thoughts about LiDAR. Right now, most customer-owned cars don't have LiDAR on them. I think a lot of people think that's going to happen in the future. Is LiDAR required, preferred for your stack? What's the advantages? And Andrew, start with you.
Going back to my point about validation, when you do a full driver out deployment, you have to go through a very rigorous, very broad-ranging set of tests that includes some combination of on-road driving, simulation, closed course, so on. And one of the things that you really want to be able to prove is that your system can be able to perform up to a certain safety standard in a wide variety of situations. Weather is one that is particularly relevant to LiDAR, but nighttime driving is another one where LiDAR is helpful. And our view is that if you want to do an L4 deployment that passes a very high safety bar, the redundancy that LiDAR provides is really, really important. So it's not so much that in the vast majority of situations it improves perception so much that it helps you drive that much better. It's seen things like pedestrians at nighttime. Camera-only perception is much more challenging there. Heavy rain, for example, for those of you who own Teslas, the FSD product will often kick out if the rain is quite heavy. And so in an L2 Plus setting, that's fine. You have a safety driver or someone behind the wheel and that can take over, and that's no big deal. So I think I'm very much aligned with the idea that LiDAR is probably not necessary for an L2 Plus or L3 deployment. L4, again, from a redundancy standpoint, you don't have that luxury. You don't have that backup. And so if you are going to be able to validate that your system is safe, that redundancy is very important. We feel very strongly that LiDAR is necessary in that circumstance.
What about you, Kaity? How do you feel about LiDAR? Is it required? Is it preferred?
In agreement on the L2 piece of things. The human driver is the redundancy, so you have a lot more flexibility on sensor modalities. I think the industry is largely coalesced around the ideas with the higher levels of autonomy, L3 and L4, some form of redundancy is required. Ultimately, we put that decision into the hands of an OEM. And with the advancements that we've seen in both, I'd say, vision and in radar, it's unclear if LiDAR is going to be required or if there's a different combination of redundancy that will suffice for L3 and L4.
Andrew, can you talk to me a little bit more about the validation stage of this? Like when you were doing a vertically integrated robot thing, you're doing everything. And so you're the testing and development and deployment is all kind of one company. But for if you have an OEM partner, you're gonna have to do a certain amount of testing. Is that kind of how much of that is how involved will Nuro be on that? And then does Nuro have any liability if the software makes a mistake, or is that on the OEM?
When you look at an L4 integration, there are very few, perhaps no OEMs out there that know how to validate an L4 system. That part of the overall AV puzzle is one that I think is underappreciated in terms of its complexity, how hard it is, how heavy of a lift it is, so on. And so without sharing too much, we have an active L4 vehicle program that we're working on today with an OEM that's quite technically sophisticated that has basically pushed all of that validation to us. And so when you think about the roles and responsibilities in these vehicle programs, core competence, so on, that validation piece, my view is that it's going to come back to the AV company. And that's what we've seen. And I think that's a big part of what we bring to the table in terms of working with both end customers in the L4 capacity and the vehicle platform supplier, that we can do that. We can help get that certification across the line. In terms of liability, I think the reality is if a really bad situation happens, God forbid someone dies, all parties involved are probably going to be, I don't want to use the word targets, but I think people are going to try to spread liability across
everybody's going to get sued.
Exactly. And so the idea that you can kind of ring fence it is probably wishful thinking. We certainly are comfortable with the idea of taking responsibility for the performance of our system. We would not put an L4 vehicle on the road and say, hey, auto manufacturer, you own this liability. We're validating the safety of the system. We're the one building that. We are fine sharing that liability.
Kaity, what about you? How does validation work when you have a partner? What's the kind of division of labor and how do you think about that?
Yeah. So we view it as Wayve is responsible for the validation of the AI driver of our technology when it comes to things like homologation and guaranteeing on-road safety. That is usually falling in the responsibility of an automotive manufacturer. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's going to depend on level of autonomy and use case as well. And where did the breakdown happen? Is it an operational deficiency? If it was the case of like an L4 fleet deployment, who's the owner operator that had a responsibility there? Is it a breakdown with the vehicle hardware? Because we're vehicle software only, that would likely be something that would be a question on the OEM side of things. Vehicle intelligence, again, that's our bread and butter, and that's where we view it as our responsibility to ensure that we're backing an intelligent and capable product.
So Kaity, I know you said that from a kind of architectural perspective, it's one software stack that can do level 2 through level 4. From the customer's perspective, how should customers expect to see this? Will there be a point where, I mean, it's like Tesla's sales pitch to people is you buy a level 2 system now and we'll push the software update, it'll be level 4 later. Do you expect that to be kind of common where, I mean, maybe current vehicles don't have the hardware, but at some point you'll be able to buy a vehicle that's like L2 now and L4 later, and maybe people will be able to, rent their vehicles out for taxi services? Or do you expect that to be, from the customer's perspective, to continue to be a separate markets where you can buy a car for yourself or you can have a robo-taxi, but the car you buy is not in the robo-taxi market or delivering goods for anybody or anything like that?
Yeah, I think you mean end consumers as in the vehicle purchasers?
Yeah.
Okay. I think a lot of this is going to be an OEM question, right? How do they want their brand to be seen? How do their consumers need to use the vehicles? What are the economics? There's always going to be some small portion of folks who will pay to have sole access to their vehicles. Where does the regulatory scene come in incentivizing, reduced vehicle ownership and higher utilization of vehicles? That'll be an important piece of things. Ultimately, I think that there's still several years in a very large untapped market of really performant L2 and L3 systems being sold in personally owned vehicles. Really, we've only seen the automotive industry scratch the surface on this. So if we think of outside of China, Tesla is really the only true point-to-point, really performant autonomous system that doesn't operate within the bounds of geofences. That leaves a ton of opportunity. I think OEMs are very hungry to address across all of their end consumers. Same with L3. I think that this is where the literal and figurative value really comes in of being able to give vehicle owners their time back on their commute with an L3 system. So just as to demystify too, because the L2, L3 can be ambiguous. L3 meaning you can take your attention back off the road as a consumer. You're behind the wheel, but you remove your hands, you remove your eyes, you can read a book, you can catch up on emails, you can take a nap, use your time more wisely. That's what I think the real near-term value is. And I think for multiple years, that will be in personally owned vehicles where consumers will be willing to pay a premium in order to get back their most valuable resource, their time.
What about you, Andrew? How do you see these two markets? Are kind of ADAS and robotaxis, do you expect those to stay kind of separate markets indefinitely, or do you think they'll start to bleed together as the ADAS systems get more capable and become capable of being used as taxis?
I generally agree with the premise that there is quite a bit of opportunity in the short term around consumer offerings in the L2 Plus and L3 side. I think that's a pretty reasonable statement given some of the consumer response to Tesla FSD and the pressure that OEMs have felt. It's hard to say exactly on what time horizon the two converge and when you start to see OEMs actually offering an L4 product. I will say that in the engagements that we have with OEMs, I think they want to believe that their AV providers can be with them through that whole journey and help them get to L4. But when it comes to unit economics, the overall cost of the system, the self-driving hardware, needs to come down significantly before there is really a business case to have an OEM offer that as an option onto their car. I mean, if you think about what FSD costs today, it's what, $100 a month or $8K thereabouts. I think uptake has been mixed. Again, there's been positive reaction, but it's still kind of early in that adoption curve. And if you think about an OEM typically needing, let's say, 2x in terms of margin on the underlying system BOM in terms of what they sell to consumers. If you need an L4 stack that is, down in the single-digit thousands, we have a little bit of ways to go before anyone has really proven that's possible. So all of that is to say, I think it will converge over time. We certainly are of the view that ultimately L4 vehicles will be personally owned and available for use on robotaxi platforms and goods delivery platforms and so on. For various reasons, we've started with L4. That's always been our technical North Star, and we're approaching it kind of down market from that way. But again, I think in the short term, there is certainly opportunity in both paths.
So for both of these markets we're talking about, there's the actual driver, and then there's a user interface element where in a personally owned vehicle, there's a some kind of dashboard that has some information on it and the controls and so forth. With level 4, there's probably an app where you hail the vehicle or get the delivery or something. Is that kind of like customer experience stuff? Do you guys see that as an inbounder for what you're doing, or is that something where there's going to be an Uber or some traditional tier 1 or somebody else that supplies that, and you guys are just focusing on keeping the drivers safe? Kaity, start with you.
Yeah, we're laser focused on vehicle intelligence. Interestingly, though, in terms of consumer experience and ability to interact, one of the things that we've seen a huge uptake in from our OEM partners is interest in having a customizable experience through our technology. So whether that be an OEM specific aspiration for having, for example, a sporty mode maybe, or for OEMs that have a really safety focused brand, if you've got sleeping kids in the back, maybe you want to take it even slower over those speed bumps. Or if you're an end consumer and you want to say, park like me. So that might mean don't just pull into your driveway. You see that I always park on the very left edge so that my husband's got space on the right side, or take the route that I take to work, or even being able to engage with the vehicle intelligence in really natural human language and say, take a left after this next vehicle, pull over behind the garbage truck, things like that. Our technology enables that level of customization, which has been of huge interest. But in terms of the physical UI itself, that's something outside of our scope that we look to partner with both OEMs and consumer-facing networks like an Uber or a Lyft.
All right. So Andrew, I'm sure that Nuro, when it was in its phase as a delivery robot company, you thought a lot about what does that customer experience look like for a delivery vehicle. Is that something that's, any of your learnings from that going to be taken to this new model, or are you really narrowing focus to just the driver and somebody else is going to do the kind of user interface for these products?
It varies a little bit by customer and vehicle platform. At a high level, I anticipate us to play a role in being a connective layer between what, say, the end L4 customer wants and what the actual vehicle does. So you look at an L4 vehicle, for example, whether it's in a delivery context or a ride-hailing context, there are certain actions that vehicle has to be able to take at the behest of a user, whether it's shutting a door, whether it's volume up, volume down. Yes, there's a screen UI that you can contemplate, so on. But for the most part, the companies that are running those sort of mobility services, whether it's goods, whether it's people, so on, they don't necessarily have the competence in-house to do that vehicle integration and power that whole experience. And so part of the vehicle programs that we see ourselves, or I should say part of the value that we see ourselves adding to these vehicle programs, again, is serving as that connective tissue.
That makes sense. Cool. One final quick question. I'd love to hear about the role of maps in both of your systems. Waymo famously has pretty detailed maps that they use for their various areas they operate. But even Tesla has a map, even if it's not as detailed one. What kind of maps are needed for your system? Are you supplying that, or is that somebody that the customer would need to bring to the table?
Yeah. Another differentiator of AV 2.0 of end-to-end AI is that we don't have a reliance on high-definition maps, which means that we operate without geofences. So I mentioned several of the countries that our vehicles operate in. We're also able to take our vehicles to new locations, sight unseen, no prior data. We call it zero-shot testing. Keep an eye out in the coming weeks for a couple of additional announcements about that. But for example, we've taken our vehicle fleet that was only ever deployed in London, had only ever been trained on London data at the time. I think we've taken it to 15 other UK cities now. Again, no maps required, no geofence required. And we see the same level of performance that we saw in the vehicle's hometown of London. So when we think about, maps might not be the highest value part of the value chain, but they are expensive and tedious and have huge downstream impacts on ability to deploy vehicles. The the lack of reliance on maps is important to ensure that when we're selling to an OEM customer, they can sell those vehicles not just in one market, not just in one state or one country, but they can sell them to consumers who can expect that that technology will work everywhere, even if it hasn't been there before.
And
L4 deployments in the next few years will require some augmentation of offline maps with HD maps. Fast forward a few years, I think it's pretty safe to say that maybe the entire industry will move to offline maps and HD maps won't be required.
all right. Thank you both. This was great.